Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL Regional Qualifier Round 1 overview and analysis video. Incredibly excited to get into this. This is the exact tournament that is going to determine the final two teams from the LPL to go to the World Championships this year in 2023. And so all of the games that we are going to talk about here are a big deal. In this video, we're going to go over the two round 1 series, which means first and foremost, we're going to find out the team that's going to get the number 3 seed with technically the upper bracket matchup. And then we're going to find out who is going to be playing for that number 4 seed later on in the week by the end of this video as well. So a lot of really good series of action to go over in this video. If you guys are excited, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what you are expecting from these teams. Which teams do you think are going to be able to get out? We're going to know one by the end of this video, but let me know who you think the other one is going to be as well in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's jump right into the action. If you are new here, what we do on this channel is we're going to go game by game in both of the series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'm going to give a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game. And then at the end of each series, I will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything together. Of course, I'll give an update on what I think is going to happen in the final series of the regional finals by the end of this episode, but mostly going to be going over just the round 1 action here today. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. Of course, I don't want to waste too much time. We've got quite a few games to go over with 2 series in a video going game by game. It's quite the expansive video, so I want to jump into it as quickly as I possibly can, and that means kicking us off with the matchup to determine who's going to be the number 3 seed to go to the World Championships. From the LPL, we had a matchup between LNG Esports and Edward Gaming. These are the number 3 and number 4 teams in terms of championship points, respectively. Obviously, EDG not being able to make the top 4 in the summer split, but being able to make the top 3 in spring, kind of all combining into them being able to get one of these upper bracket spots, even though, you know, a team like Top Esports did perform better this split over the course of this year. They had better finishes, I guess you could say, and so they are going to be the ones to get this upper bracket spot. But LNG more than deserving a spot at the World Championships basically already. We just saw this team very recently play in the LPL finals. They were a top 2 team here in summer, but because they really didn't do all that well in the spring split, they ended up getting 5th, 6th, which is certainly not ideal. They end up falling here into the regional qualifier with, of course, JD Gaming, the champions, and Billy getting those automatic qualification spots. But LNG is in a pretty enviable position. They only have to win 1 series in order to get to the World Championships, which is very good. Obviously, they're in great form right now, and I think a lot of people are going to see this as a pretty easy series for them, and I would tend to agree. EDG has been very inconsistent over the course of this year. They've really struggled at playing as a team, you know, especially towards the back half of the year when Uzi came in. It hasn't necessarily ever felt like everything is clicking for this roster, although they do have a crazy amount of talent, and they did win 2 playoff series this split, and so we know that they can perform. It's just about whether or not they can perform up to the level of one of the best teams in the world right now, quite frankly, in LNG. I think a lot of people are going to see LNG as the favorites, but going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But of course, if we're going game by game, that means we get to start with game number 1. And so the winner of game number 1 was LNG Esports. They are able to take the first game in the series. They're going to go up 1-0 again. Always important to be able to generate that confidence and that momentum at the beginning of any best of 5. Just kind of show and prove that you can beat the opposition, be able to gain control. It's much easier to win 50% of the final games rather than having to win 75% of the final games. It certainly makes the series a lot easier for the team that ends up winning it, and I think LNG already had such a confidence advantage going into this series, knowing what they could do against some of the best teams in the world, not only making the finals, taking down a team that's already going to Worlds and BLG, but taking JDG to 5 games, being up 2-1 in the finals, and not only doing it once, but doing it twice. So LNG had a lot of confidence, and I think that was only bolstered by this kind of performance. They were really good in this game number 1. Player of the game, pretty obvious for me. It is going to go to Gala in the bot lane. He wasn't great, quite frankly, in the finals. I think when you're looking at an area that LNG kind of struggled in when it came to the finals, it was playing through bot lane. I think Tarzan and Scout were actually really good, especially in their wins. In that final series, I think Tarzan obviously fell off a little bit as the series went on, and Scout is just crazy consistent. He's a ridiculously good player, but Gala, I think, really needed to step up and really needed to be able to match some of the pressure that was coming in from the side of JDG that previous series, and it wasn't quite there. In my opinion, this is a great start to show that he is going to be able to do that here. Obviously, two former legendary RNG AD carries, Gala and Uzi, going up against each other. Certainly an intriguing matchup, but Gala absolutely getting the upper hand, at least in the first matchup here. And then I think the rest of the team also did perform very well. Tarzan with a ton of really good setups, some really good engages. He was creating so much for the rest of this team. I think him and Scout have ridiculously good chemistry. We were talking about how last year for LNG, Tarzan and Doanby just never really felt like they clicked as a duo. It felt like they both wanted to try and support the other, while neither really wanted to take a ridiculous amount of the resources. I think that this partnership for Tarzan has worked significantly better. Scout is someone who is more than happy to take resources on champions like Azir and try to carry the game, but Tarzan can also leave Scout alone. He's really good in isolated 1v1s, even in matchups that aren't necessarily the most favorable for him, and he can spend a lot of his resources bot lane or top lane, as we've seen before. And I think Gala was obviously given a lot of opportunity to succeed in this game, but Tarzan was a big reason for that. Gala ended up being the one that had to make it worth the while, but Tarzan was the one setting him up. Hang was really good, again, also kind of being a part of that setup. Mostly was actually used for peel throughout this game, which I think is fine. You've got an Alistar, you've got a Kennen. You really don't want your Kai'Sa to get blown up in some random accident, and so if that Rakan's going to be staying on the backside, that's good. Zika went Deathless on Cassante, always going to be a good sign. Scout, like I said, was good. LNG in general just looked a lot better than EDG in this game number 1, and that's kind of anticipated. We kind of thought that they were going to be the better team, and I think they lived up to that expectation early on in this series. But for EDG on the other side, definitely not how you wanted to start this, and I think, again, it's just a couple of players that aren't playing particularly well in their current form, and that's going to stand out and start with Mako, who's going to be my dud of the game in game number 1. He's really kind of had the worst stretch of his career over the second half of 2023, and I think that's been very unfortunate. You can talk about Uzi coming in and actually being a pretty big positive for EDG, and I would agree. I think Uzi's actually been, mechanically speaking, very good for what EDG does. I think he's basically taken the leave role and done it just as well, if not a little bit better. The only problem Uzi has had is being able to communicate with the rest of the team, because it really feels like he's on a different page from them a lot of the time, and that is no more apparent than his partnership with Mako. I think that they're relatively okay in laning phase, because I think both of them are just smart players that know how to do things, but you move out of laning phase, and these two are just never in sync, never on the same page, and Mako, I think, has really suffered for it. The Alistar this game was not very good. A lot of engages that just ended up falling incredibly flat. You really needing to get on the Kai'Sa and the Azir, especially towards the back half of this game, but like I said, if you're not able to get on them, they're going to deal more damage than Trist and Zeri from behind, and so, you know, Mako just really struggled. He got blown up instantly in so many of these fights. Alistar is very tanky, but not when you're playing from as far behind as he was. It's not like the rest of the team was doing well, though. Fofo really struggled in the mid lane matchup, gave over way too much pressure early playing as the Tristana, which is never a good thing. Jeje was completely out-pressured on the map. The tempo of the game was completely in favor of LNG, and I think you can argue that that's not entirely his fault on the Ivern, but Tarzan was way more efficient with his gold and with his time this game. Ale was basically useless in the top lane. I don't really think he did anything. Not that he was particularly bad, and Uzi was picking up some kills, but a lot of it was at the expense of, like, the rest of his team's life, and so EDG just not really showing a lot, quite frankly, in game number 1. I'm concerned for this team. I don't think it's going to be a particularly close series, and I thought that before game number 1. Game number 1 only further propagated that in my mind. This was not a very close game number 1, but congrats to LNG. This is a really nice way to start off the series, but like I said, it's not over. Like, you still got to be able to finish it off, and so EDG very much going to be looking to pull an LPL special and tie up the series at 1 apiece, but if LNG can gain that 2-0 lead, especially with the form that they're currently in, it's going to be disaster for EDG. So is EDG going to be able to keep things interesting, or is LNG going to pull ahead very, very quickly here? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Edward Gaming. They are able to take game number 2. They're going to tie up the series at 1 apiece. Like I said earlier, the LPL Classic, if you will. Very few series have started 2-0 in the LPL this split. I think it's actually only JDG and BLG in the playoffs, which is insane, but EDG keeping that trend going by tying up the series at 1 apiece here, and they played so much better here in game number 2. They continue to play through some of the players that have gotten hot in the playoffs, which I think is obviously the correct strategy strategy. If you have a player who is playing well at the moment, pick them a champion that they are really good at and let them play a style that ends up drawing a lot of pressure to them so that they can create a lot for the rest of the team. And that's exactly what they did here. EDG's best performing member through the playoffs was very clearly Ale in the top lane, who really was a standout for them. And now he's going up against his former team, his former org. Give him the keys to the kingdom in this series, and they absolutely did. I think it's a great call. I think it's a great choice. The Jax was awesome here. In game number 2, he was able to create so much pressure in the side lane to be able to let a lot of the comp from EDG that kind of struggled in game number 1 scale up into a part of the game that they were a lot more comfortable with. Now, yes, you're scaling into Sedge, Azir, Braum, which is a pretty difficult thing, and even the Varus, right? The Varus is still going to hurt, but you yourself have consistent engage here with the Rel and the Nautilus, and you've got tons of damage, specifically with the Zeri, but also with the Tristana, who can do a lot in the late game, even though people kind of consider her an early game champion at the current moment. And if you've got Jax dominating a side lane, taking every tower in the game, putting on so much pressure, and you're still going to be able to get a lot of the objectives, you're still going to be able to get Soul, that's massive for EDG, and I think they just played the map incredibly well, which is very, very good to see, because that's something that I think EDG has been pretty bad at over the course of this year, is playing towards the map in a constructive and consistent way. So to see them be able to do it here in game number 2 in a series that kind of affects whether or not they're going to be going to the World Championships, that's big. That's massive for this team. So really good stuff. Like I said, Ale, pretty easy choice for player of the game. You can't pull this off if you don't have one of the best top laners in the world. It just becomes so much more difficult to do it against a really good team like LNG, who's just going to be more consistent than you in team fights. If you don't have that advantage in the top lane, this game becomes significantly harder. So big credit to Ale, but I want to give a lot of credit to the rest of this team as well. I think Mako had a much better game here on the Nautilus, was actually creating a ton for this team, specifically Fofo in the mid lane, who was actually doing a lot for EDG. I think that Fofo goes relatively under the radar, depending on your opinion of him as a player, because I think he's just not necessarily the most flashy mid laner in the entire league. I think that he's been pretty consistently good for EDG, maybe not like a top 3 mid laner, but I don't think you have to be a top 3 mid laner in order to be good enough to go to Worlds. He's arguably top 5, and I think that that's absolutely well within the realm of possibility at the current moment, and I think this was another game of him, you know, generating some pressure early and using the rest of his team to be able to capitalize on that. Obviously, he really benefited from Ale in the top lane, but I think in general, he was probably the most active team fighter alongside Mako. I think Jeja was also really good on the Rel. Uzi had some good moments on the Zeri, even though they didn't really call on him all that much over the back half of this game. It was just good to have him, but EDG in general, I think, looked significantly more consistent, and that's kind of what you're looking for here. And then for LNG on the other side, some good, some bad here. I think the good is the fact that I don't think you gave up. Like, you continued to try and make plays, but the bad was I really don't think you were expecting Ale to be as big of a problem as he was. Zika, in particular, I think struggled in this game, and he's going to get my debt of the game. I'm not going to freak out too much. Zika's actually been really good for LNG over the course of this playoff run. He's been incredibly influential in terms of being able to create pressure on the map for LNG, and being able to consistently win 1v1 in lane was a big reason why they were able to get to the finals. He was better than Bin in the semifinals, which a lot of people were not expecting, but I would be mistaken to not say that he was a little bit of a problem in this game. If you're going to pick the Renekton into Jax, you need to be able to stop that Jax early. You can't let him get to the part of the game where he is going to be able to just outpace you, and unfortunately, it was just consistent. Ale was way better than Zika throughout this entire game, and I think it was very noticeable. Scout, I think, had a little bit of a rough one on the Azir, was able to trade back some damage in the back half of the game, but Fofo was so much more active than him in the early part of the game that Scout really was just losing a lot of pressure for his team. Gala and Hang, I think, were definitely the worst bot lane. Mako was having significantly more of an impact than the Braum, who's basically there to try and stop the engage coming in from Rel and Nautilus, but it's easy to peel the Nautilus. It's much harder to peel the Rel if you are Braum, and so you're kind of sitting in that position, and Gala's not really going to be dealing enough damage to be able to match either of the marksmen on the other side of the map. And so LNG going to be dropping in this game number 2, but again, the series is just tied up. You're not going to freak out too much. It's one game, and honestly, it's a very, very stoppable strategy that EDG went to in this one. If you can shut down Ale, a lot of the plan around this game kind of crumbles, right? Fofo definitely needed to get ahead for this to work, and Ale needed to play really well. Obviously, he had some good engages coming out, but LNG has the playbook to be able to stop this. It's just about whether or not they can actually execute on that. But for EDG, you have shown that you are able to take a game and take games off of LNG in this series, and so Hopefully this gives you the kind of confidence that you need to be able to play with the rest of this series. If you're going into these games knowing that if you execute, you can win, that's a big advantage. You know, doubting yourself, I think, is something that EDG has really struggled with over the course of this split, and I think hopefully that's something that they're not going to worry about too much in a series like this. But a big game 3 here, being able to wrestle control of this series back is going to be very important for both of these teams. So who's going to be able to do it? Well, the winner of game number 3 was LNG. They are able to take game 3. They're going to regain control of this series, going back up 2-1 in it, and this was a much more classic LNG game than what we got in game number 2. This was LNG playing through a lot of early aggression, but not necessarily completely blowing anybody out of the water, but having that safety net of just knowing that you have Gala on this like hyper-scaling ADC in the bot lane. This time in the Sivir, who, again, I'm pretty low on this champion in general, but we've been seeing it rise in popularity. We've been seeing some people pick it up a little bit more as we've head into the playoffs. I think in general, the AD carry pool is just so large. There really aren't like distinct good or bad picks in the AD carry role right now, basically outside of Kai'Sa. And so if you have the opportunity to go for something else, you know, I see it as, you know, more of the Wild West than anything else, and Sivir definitely falls into that, but this was more standard from LNG in the fact that Tarzan gets his Sejuani, something that he's played a ridiculous amount of, not only over the course of this year, but over the course of his career. It's kind of the champion that I think most people, me included, just associate the most with him as a player, and he started playing around mid lane a lot early. You put Scout on something like the Jace that's going to be a little bit more active than maybe the Azir will in the early game, and he's really able to run things. You get Tarzan and Scout moving around the map, generating a lot of advantages, and then by the time you hit this mid game, all of a sudden this team that, you know, really doesn't feel like they've dominated the game has this big gold lead, and they're going to win every single fight. Really interesting to note, something that I haven't brought up nearly as much as I probably should have over the course of the LPL playoffs is that we're really starting to see a trend when it comes to objectives. I've brought it up a little bit, but Dragons in general are very not prioritized by LPL teams. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to continue as they head internationally, or maybe it's just something they see on this particular patch, but they are valuing Rift Herald significantly higher than they are valuing Dragons, and we're consistently seeing teams that are on the losing end, losing in gold, losing in early game pressure, be able to get early Dragons relatively for free. Now, by the time we get to the team fight stage, you know, LNG was trying to contest a lot of these Dragons, and they were trying to stop Soul. I think they are concerned about that, but I think teams are seeing just general dragon stacking as a pretty poor strategy towards winning, specifically in the LPL, which is very interesting. We've been seeing it a little bit in North America as well. Those are the two regions that I think really prioritize Herald over anything else, but that continued in this game, LNG continuing to want to do that, and I think that really does apply a little bit more to the pressure that they wanted to show in the mid lane. Gala eventually gets to the point in the late game where he is going to deal some damage. It never really gets like super online Sivir. You do need like 3.5 items to really get like super online Sivir. That's what you're drafting her for. But Gala, I think, was a good enough player to be able to deal a good amount of damage to be able to keep up. And especially if you're going into something like Varus, you don't really need to have like consistent, ridiculous amounts of damage. You just need to be able to, you know, out damage the Varus, which I think was relatively simple for Gala this game. And I think Scout was definitely the MVP. He was the player of the game, if you will. It's really easy for LNG to win when they can play through mid lane on this early game carry and just generate so much pressure in the mid game, right? Like, that's just how LNG has been able to play basically 2023 up until this point, and it was another good strategy here, but you do have to give a lot of credit to Tarzan as well. You don't do nearly as well in this game if you don't have jungle and mid stepping up, but again, been a relatively consistent formula for them. Hang has been good, Zika's been fine, even if I think Ole's been better. LNG is good enough, and definitely able to play through their best players a little bit more consistently than what EDG is able to do. Speaking of them, they had some moments in this game. I mean, Uzi actually was doing a really good amount of damage on the Varus, and he was definitely the standout player on EDG, in my opinion, in this game. I think Varus in particular is a champion that I'm really just not all that high on. Similar to Sivir, I like Varus a lot more. I don't want to, you know, compare the two, but you know, Varus is just one of those champions that I think, you know, you really have to have a comp that really works for him in order to make it work. He's not going to be this super big hyper carry in a meta where I think a lot of hyper carries are really good in the bot lane, and we're seeing a lot more scaling. You need him to be aggressive in the early game, and you need him to be able to take over some of these mid-game fights, especially pairing it up with something like Tristana. You're going to lack an ability to really deal the same amount of damage as something like a Sivir the longer the game goes on. You do have the Braum, you do have the Rel, you do have the Ornn, you have pieces to set him up, and he's certainly not going to deal small amounts of damage damage in the back half of the game, but it's just in comparison, right? Like, Varus will still hurt, but will he hurt as much as some of the other AD carries? Maybe not as much, and I think we started to see that in some of the late game team fights, but dud of the game for me is going to go to Fofo in the mid lane. It really felt like he lost a lot of pressure in this game. I think the Trist is incredibly influential. Talked about that in game number 2 for EDG. Fofo being able to generate that lead early and being able to move around the map and create a lot of pressure. That's what gave EDG a lot of their success, a lot of their advantages in that game. And so, you know, for Fofo to lose that pressure in the early game to the Jace, I think it's really difficult for EDG to play the map without mid lane pressure, which is why I think they've struggled quite a bit in the playoffs. But Jeje was significantly worse than Tarzan, even if I don't think any of his rel engages were really all that bad. Mako ended up dying for the team a ton. People are going to criticize him, but I think he was relatively fine this game. And Ale was better than Zika in lane, but it doesn't really matter. You're the Ornn, and, you know, if the rest of the map is losing, there's really not a ton you can do, even if you are a really good player. And he certainly has been the best player for EDG today. So, interesting to see where this goes, but you're now on the brink of elimination point for EDG. You know, obviously not elimination. I shouldn't have said that because they wouldn't be eliminated, but they would need to go to another series. They would not lock their spot in at Worlds, and LNG is one game away from confirming their spot at Worlds, again, after being in that situation in the finals as well. Can they get it done this time, unlike what they were able to do in those LPL finals, or is EDG going to take us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was LNG. They are able to take game 4. They're going to wrap up this series in 4 games, and they have done it. They have officially locked up a spot at the 2023 World Championships. Congratulations to this LNG team. I think a lot of people would have been really upset if this team didn't end up going to Worlds after how their summer split ended, but not going to have to worry about that too much. They end up taking care of business relatively easily in this series against EDG. Even in their one loss, it really was more so due to map pressure rather than any individual outskilling, I guess you could say. But LNG is really clicking right now, and they're looking like one of the best teams in the world. I think you absolutely have to consider them in that same kind of conversation with, you know, JD Gaming and Billy and then KT Rolster and Gen G and, you know, all the other teams that I think have rightfully placed their name in that conversation. I think LNG has very much blazed their way through it as well. This was a great series from them, and most specifically, this was a great series from their bot lane. My player of the game here in game number 4, and my player of the series overall, is going to go to Gala. I wasn't going to say I was worried, because honestly, it really did feel like a little bit of a, whatever, you know, like, oh, you lost to, you know, JD Gaming, it's okay. Like, Gala and Hang, though, weren't very good in the finals, and so I didn't want to try and sit there and say that, you know, this team was definitely going to have one of the best bot lanes at the World Championships, because I think that's a pretty bold thing to say, but I think with performances like this, it just goes to show that I think if they go up against a bot lane that they're just straight up better than, if the team is able to kind of invest resources into them and, you know, try to play towards that bot side a little bit more, then Gala and Hang are more than capable of being able to take down some really good players. We'll talk about Uzi and Mako in a second, but they were miserable in this game number 4. This was a ginormous bot gap in the final game of the series, and a lot of that was Gala, a lot of that was Hang as well, who I think is kind of the unsung hero of this LNG team. He kind of has been the unsung hero over the course of this year up until this point, even in Spring Split when this team was doing well, but I think Tarzan, Scout, Gala, obviously going to get a lot of the attention, and, you know, Zika's really good as well, so I think Hang ends up falling under the radar, I guess I should say, and I don't think he really can anymore. LNG's bot lane has been really good, especially against, you know, teams and bot lanes that aren't nearly as communicative and as good in the early game as they are. They were really good in this series, but Tarzan had a phenomenal series as well. As good as the bot lane was, Gala and Hang, definitely the two players that stand out, but Tarzan was fantastic. Scout, in general, had a really good series. Love to see him on the playmakers, but still, I mean, the Azir is also really good, like giving yourself that safety blanket. And Azir plus Xayah, something that we weren't seeing work out all that much for a lot of teams earlier on in the split, seems to have come around for a lot of different teams. We've seen the duo really work together. I like the idea of it. Xayah's just generally really good, basically at every part of the game, but specifically in this current meta is more so known for being able to shove early and being able to dominate lane phase, and then the Azir gives you so much consistency over the back half of the game that you're just really never in a bad spot, and you can go for some more aggressive picks like the Camille on the top side because you've got more stable carries in the bot side of the map, and so I just like the idea of it. Scout was good. Zika was okay in this series. I think Ale was better, which we'll talk about in a second, but Zika is still more than fine. He was really good in their playoff run that ended up getting them into finals in the first place, and so I'm not going to sit here and freak out about it, but this really, in my opinion, was mostly about the bot lane, but Tarzan and Scout looking good. LNG just looks incredibly solid, and they have more than earned their place at Worlds. And then for EDG on the other side of the map, you know, they're not eliminated. Their Worlds bid is not completely over yet because they were one of the top 2 teams in terms of championship points in this tournament. It means that even with this loss, they're still going to have one more best of 5 chance to get to the World Championships, playing the winner of the series that we'll talk about a little bit later, but they're really not looking all that good at the current moment. And honestly, if I was an EDG fan, I would be a little bit concerned because I do think while some of these players are stepping up and playing relatively well, I thought Ale in particular had a great series, talked about him a ton, was really good on the Rumble here in Game 4, and was just generally really solid, was the reason they won Game 2, even solid in Game 3 on the Ornn. You know, you can only do so much, and I do think, luckily for them, that, you know, the other 2 teams in this regional qualifier do have relatively weak top sides, exploitable top sides, but Ale is stepping up. I think Fofo was okay this series. He's often cited as kind of the weak link of this EDG team. I just don't necessarily agree with that. He was pretty good here in game number 4, was doing a ridiculous amount of damage in the mid game on that Tristana. I think if they had had a bot lane, like, this game could have been winnable for EDG, but they just didn't have a bot lane. Jeje was whatever this series. Tarzan was significantly better, which is definitely worth noting because, you know, Jeje was really good in spring, but it really feels like he's kind of just been a guy in the summer split, which is unfortunate. But really, when you're looking at the ways that game 4 ended up going wrong, Uzi and Mako definitely stand out. They were the weak point of this team. Mako's going to get out of the game, but you could give this to Uzi as well. They just didn't play very well. Kai'Sa Leona is a very risky bot lane to end up going for. When you're going into something like Xayah, it's a very bold pick, and it did not work out for them in this game. If they had been a little bit more active, a little bit better, I actually think the Rumble plus Tristana combo could have been a little bit more dangerous to go into. You have significant lockdown here with Leona and Rel, but Uzi and Mako, I think, played so bad in game number 4 that it was basically unwinnable for EDG, but again, their season is not over. They're going to have one more shot at being able to qualify for Worlds. We're going to go ahead and preview that series at the end of this one, but with the way that they have played up until this point, there definitely are valid questions that have arisen. But for LNG, congratulations. You're going to be heading to the World Championships. You no longer have to play in the LPL. They absolutely deserve it. A lot of these players are in peak form. Scout has arguably been the best player performance-wise in the LPL this year. Gala and Tarzan are great. Hang and Zika are some of the best ancillary pieces in the entire league. This team really is clicking, and if they continue to get better throughout the rest of the year and going into Worlds, who's to say this isn't a team that we could be looking at as a potential Worlds winner in a couple of months? But now that we know our first team to officially qualify from the regional qualifier here in the LPL with that number 3 seed, it's time to find out who's going to be taking on Edward Gaming in that final matchup to determine the number 4 seed. We've got the number 5 and 6 teams in terms of championship points here, and it is a matchup between Top Esports and Weibo Gaming. Probably the most intriguing matchup we could have gotten here, because I think both of these teams are incredibly similar in terms of execution. 2 veteran mid laners that could be considered some of the best in LPL history. You know, kind of opposite style AD carries, a very aggressive one in Jackie Love and a much more stable one in Light, but both are incredibly effective. And then 2 questionable top sides, Wayward and the Shy, that have both been very inconsistent throughout the year. Really like the matchup that these 2 teams have going into each other. I would think that Top Esports would be the more talented team, but Weibo, man, they can win any game. They went to 5 with LNG, and we just saw how good that team actually is, and so that's a pretty good thing on their resume. Outside of that, they've been able to take down JD Gaming. They're 4-0 against JDG in 2023, which is wild, but they also, I think, are 0-4 against Invictus Gaming, and so, you know, take that with a grain of salt, right? This is a team that is born to win trade. They are going to win, you know, all the games that they shouldn't, and they're going to lose a lot of games that they should win, and so, you know, it's going to be interesting to see which version of them ends up showing up. But Top Esports also relatively inconsistent. Some of these players have played really well over the course of this split. Tion and Jackie Love obviously pretty at the top of that priority list, both all-pro caliber players this split. Jackie Love was my MVP pick, but the ancillary pieces haven't been nearly as consistent. Rookie definitely stepped it up in playoffs, which is what you wanted to see. He was a ton better in playoffs than he was in the regular season, but Wayward and Mark have been question marks. I like Mark, especially early on in laning phase. I think that that's a big strength of his, but Wayward has certainly been a question mark basically throughout his entire time here on TES. Who's going to be able to come out on top? It's an interesting debate. I would expect TES to have the advantage here because of their, slight increase in consistency with their players, but like I said, Weibo can take anyone down, so it's going to be a fun series nonetheless. But of course, we got to start here with game number 1, and that means the winner of game number 1 was Top Esports. They are able to take the first game in this series in pretty dominant fashion and start off with a big confidence booster. This is what you want to do against a team like Weibo. As good as Weibo is, they're probably the team that relies the most on momentum and confidence of anybody in the world for their skill level. And so to be able to generate that first win in this series, to be able to generate a 1-0 series lead, I think is major for this team, and they did it in such a dominant fashion, and that's really what you want to see. Indexing very heavily into the snowball game here with the Jace Draven coming out from Jackula. Kind of love this. Like, Draven's really not being picked up as much as I think he should. He can really destroy games incredibly easily. You just have to get him 1 or 2 kills relatively early on in the mid game, and it's very difficult to stop, and especially when your best player is your AD carry and has been kind of your primary carry throughout the entire year. Getting Jackie into that position made it very difficult for Weibo to even try and play out this game. Towards the back half, you had so much gold on him. Jace is so strong that, a typically early game quote-unquote oriented champion can do so much in team fights right now, and you got an insane performance from Wayward in the top lane. This game just became so much easier for TES, especially after the early game. But player of the game pretty easily for me is going to go to Wayward in the top lane. Crazy good game coming out from him on the Cassante. I know we consider him a weakness, but the Shy certainly hasn't been fantastic this split either. He's certainly been a lot more up and down than people give him credit for. I think Wayward, you could argue, has been more stable than the Shy over the course of the regular season. Yes, both of them lose, but I think Wayward loses a little bit less often, but also by that token, I think the Shy's good games are way better than Wayward's, or at least that's what I would have said going into this series, but this was an awesome game number 1 coming in from Wayward. I am higher on him as a player. I think he's fine. I don't think he's like a great top laner by any means, but I think he's like fine, right? Like if he were on a different team, I don't think people would have nearly the same kind of vitriol that people have for him on Top Esports, but he was really good in this game number 1, and you've definitely got to acknowledge that. But Jackie Love obviously was a big deal. Rookie was awesome in this game on the Jace. Mark was setting up a ton on the Nautilus, was really, really good in the bot lane. I would argue easily the second most important player to this team. And then Tian was also very good, was very active, sometimes getting himself into a little bit of trouble on this Maokai, but for the most part, it ended up working at it, and it ended up being worth it in the end. I think in general, this was just a really good game from Top Esports, and it's basically exactly what you wanted to see at the start of this series. But I think you could say the opposite for Weibo. This is the exact opposite of what you wanted to see at the start of this series. You probably wanted to be able to generate some momentum, confidence, like I said earlier, but to kind of get slammed, quite frankly, is just not exactly what you were looking for. Top Esports definitely challenged you in this one, picking up the Jace, picking up the Draven, saying, if we can get online, we know we can beat you, and we're going to be able to get online. And Weibo, unfortunately for them, just weren't able to stop it. A couple of their players, I think, really underperformed in this one. My dud of the game is going to go to Light in the bot lane. He very rarely gets these dud of the games. He's really not someone that I think underperforms all that much for this Weibo team or for really any of the teams that he's played for in the past, but this was a pretty poor game from him on the Aphelios. He was so much less effective than Jackie Love, and honestly, Mark did a phenomenal job of being able to track Light in a lot of these skirmishes, especially in the early part of the mid game, and just making sure that he played aggressive enough where the Aphelios did not feel comfortable stepping up, and Light really had no way to get around that. Crisp was essentially there to try and protect him, but there's only so much that the Braum can do when there's so much damage on the side of TES. If he does stand in the front and tries to take some hits, he's gonna die instantly, and so Light ended up going down in a lot of circumstances. I think the Shy was also pretty poor. Like I said, Wayward had an awesome game being able to take advantage of this Renekton pick on the other side, and this is what happens with the Shy sometimes. He can go into a player like Wayward, who a lot of people consider to be not very good, and just kind of get slammed. Like, that's who the Shy is as a player. He probably have at least one good game this series because he has basically basically all playoffs long. Usually it's right after he completely ints, so watch out game number 2, but this was not a particularly good game. Weiwei was, in my opinion, not very good on the Lilia, was trying to create some action, but it was a little bit too much, and Xiaohu, he was trying to play well, but I think it was just a little, it was too little too late at that point by the time that Xiaohu was actually trying to create plays on the map, and so for Weibo, it just felt like they kind of got outpaced at their own game, which is certainly going to be frustrating, but you got to put it behind you. You've got to be able to tie this series up at 1 apiece. If they go down 0-2, I imagine that confidence is at an all-time low, but if there ever was a team that's going to be able to bounce back from a situation like that, somehow, some way, I do think it's Weibo Gaming, but Top's got to feel very, very good about this game 1 win. Hopefully, they can carry it into game number 2 in terms of the momentum, being able to generate that 2-0 lead and putting themselves in a great position for the rest of this series. But are they going to be able to do that, or is Weibo going to tie it up? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Weibo Gaming. They are able to take game 2. They're going to tie up this series, like I said, at 1 apiece. And again, this is the LPL special. 1-1 series are just how things work here in China. Nobody is going to be able to generate any sort of large lead against each other. They're basically the exact opposite of the LCK, who's not even in playoffs yet, and yet I think has already had so many 2-0 series in the regular season that the LPL just simply could never compete with. But been a wild playoff run for basically everybody here, and Weibo is going to be tying up the series, making it even more interesting. TES had a pretty dominant game in game number 1. Weibo answers with a dominant game of their own. This was not a close game really at all. This was a stomp, and I think that, again, that's really positive for Weibo. It goes to show that both of these teams are capable of winning, and not only winning, but destroying the opponent, and I think that that should build enough confidence for both of them that moving forward, it should be more about the talent than it is about the momentum, which I think is a good thing overall. Player of the game for me here in game number 2 is going to go to Weiwei in the jungle on this Rel. I mean, just creating every bit of action that Weibo ended up having in this series. I think Weiwei's actually been a little bit quiet for this team throughout this split. Say what you will about Karsa, but Karsa certainly wasn't quiet. He would have really bad games. Obviously, a lot of people are going to remember those, but he would also have a lot of really good games, and I think he would kind of fluctuate, be a little bit more hit or miss between those. Weiwei's kind of in the middle, right? Not necessarily going to have as good or as bad of performances as I think Karsa was having for this team, but also really is going to be very consistent at what Weiwei does offer him. I do think that this was definitely a little bit of a quote-unquote overperformance from Weiwei. I like him as a player, but I don't find him to be elite, but this was an elite-level performance, which is really good to see. Rel can be so dangerous in the jungle when piloted correctly, but that second part of the sentence is the big part there. We've seen Rels really fail throughout the world. At being able to generate early leads, you really do have to put yourself in a position where you're playing from ahead, because Rel in the jungle from behind is basically useless. The only thing that that champion really does at a high level is pressure and, engage. And if you're not going to be able to do that, if you're not in a position where you can play super aggro on the Rel, there really isn't a lot that she can do to end up keeping the game relatively close unless you're just completely out macroing. So Weiwei getting that lead in the early game on this Edge-20 was incredibly important, and I think they did a really good job of being able to capitalize on it. Light and Crisp had a much better game here in game 2. Light obviously really struggling in game number 1, but kind of a role reversal in this one. TES bot lane really won in game 1. The Weibo Gaming bot lane really won here in game number 2. This is more of what I expect from Light and Crisp, who really have been arguably a top 3 bot lane in the LPL this split. I think right up there with, Billy and JD Gaming. I think Light and Crisp, consistency-wise, are right there in terms of both of these players, both all-pro caliber players in their roles. Crisp ended up getting that nod for me. Light, not so much, because, again, AD carry's just a really stacked role, but Light was really good here. Crisp was awesome on a Leona pick that, again, I'm just not a huge fan of at the moment. Obviously, you've got a ridiculous amount of lockdown here, but especially pairing it up with the Zeri, I don't think lockdown is necessarily what Zeri needs. Zeri needs flexibility in terms of how she likes to play the game, and that's not necessarily what Leona offers, but still ended up making it work because they were better in this game. Xiaohu destroyed Rookie in this game. I mean, the amount of pressure that Weiwei created in the jungle for Rel made it very hard for Jace to play the game, and once the Azir was online, Xiaohu was unstoppable. Great game. And the Shy, I think, was solid as well. We'll talk about Wayward in a second. To me, he was clearly the best player on Top Esports again here in game number 2. I know all the people who were saying that Wayward is completely washed and can't play the game are definitely scrambling right now, but he's easily, in my opinion, been the best member through the first 2 games. We'll get to him in a second, but again, solid game from the Shy on a really strong champion in Rumble. Everything just kind of worked for Weibo. This was a good game from them. And then, like I said, for top, you had a player in Wayward who I think stepped up. Everybody else, I think, was a disaster this game. Tion was at the very least active and trying to make plays, but he was so far behind because of some really bad early plays from him that I think it just wasn't able to catch up, right? Like, it doesn't really matter how well you play in the mid to late game if you're already at such a disadvantage against a Rel and a Rumble and an Azir and a Zeri. Like, you don't want to be behind against this team comp. There really isn't a lot you're going to be able to do, but I think the carries from Top Esports definitely disappointed in this one. Rookie was at the very least trying to deal damage, but Jace from behind in the mid game is just not super effective at being able to bring the game back. And Jackie Love was very poor this game. He's going to get my dud of the game, consistently just kind of walking up and dying, dealing basically no damage across this entire game. Not what you want to see from Jackie Love, but Light kind of had a performance pretty similar in game number 1. You're not going to freak out, I think, too much with this kind of performance, but it is something to keep in mind. Mark was incredibly useless on the Nautilus, again, because the entire team was super far behind. This is just not a comp that you can pilot particularly easily when you've lost so hard, and Weibo in particular is a comp that's very difficult to play into when they are ahead, and so it was just kind of doomed from the start, and eventually Weibo was just able to spiral the game out of control. But the series is now tied up at 1 apiece. Both of these teams have shown that they are capable of beating each other. I think Wayward has been surprisingly good, and that was, to me, a big turning point in this series. So if TES can get better performances out of their carries, I think this can still be a series that they end up taking. But really nice win here from Weibo. Again, if they're going to play like this, if Weiwei in particular is going to be able to step up and play like this the whole series, it's going to be very difficult for TES to win. But game number 3 is going to be crucial. Generating that momentum and that confidence going back to that again is going to be big. Only having to win 1 of the final 2 games instead of having to win both is also a pretty big advantage in a best of 5, especially against really good teams like both of these are. So who's going to be able to gain that advantage? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Top Esports. They are able to take game 3 here. They're going to go up in this series 2-1. And man, that's what you wanted to see from TES. You wanted to see them step up, and you really wanted to see this bot lane in particular play a lot better. They really struggled a lot in game number 2, but I really liked how they played in this one. A couple of the players that have been stepping up for this team aren't the ones that I think a lot of people anticipated being the focal point for Top Esports in a big series like this. But you know what? Mark and Wayward have been awesome in this series up until this point. Mark struggled a bit in game 2, but Wayward, I think, has been easily the most stable player on TES through the first 3 games here. Pretty good game from him on the Ornn, but player of the game for me in game 3 is going to go to Mark in the support position. And who would have thought that? Wayward and Mark, the first 2 player of the games for TES in this series. A lot of people are looking at them as pretty big hindrances, pretty big weaknesses, but I actually think they've played really well in this series against Weibo in particular, and those are the players that really do need to step up if this team is going to be going to the World Championships. You need to get good performances out of your top laner, out of your support, and so far, they've absolutely come through in the clutch. Now, it's not to say it's just been them. I'm going to give a lot of credit to the other players on this team as well, but this was really the first game of this series that wasn't a complete blowout. Like, I think game 1 obviously in favor of TES, game 2 in favor of Weibo. This game was definitely a little bit more back and forth. Weibo actually had a really strong lead at about 15-ish minutes that they just could not hang on to, mostly because just better team fighting from Top Esports was basically how the last, 10 minutes of this game was defined, but still really good stuff coming in from this team. Mark was the biggest part of that. A lot of those engages on Rel were just so influential. Again, another champion, we just talked about it in game 2, that can be so influential on how a lot of the late game fights end up playing out, that when you do have such a dynamic performer on it, Mark being a really aggressive support, someone who has gotten in trouble for being too aggressive as a support in the past, but someone who's not afraid to try and make decisions. I think that Mark ended up piloting it well, and I thought he was super influential. Of course, again, Jackie Love deserves a ton of mention for this game. A ridiculous game coming in from him on the Kai'Sa. I think if you have a worse AD carry player, even with Mark playing as well as he did, this game is much harder to win because Jackie Love really was all of their damage in in the late game, and he came up in the clutch. His ability to carry team fights on that champion was electric, and that was an MVP level performance. That's what we wanted to see out of the bot lane here for TES. I think both of them ended up making it work, and both of them ended up proving why they deserve to be in this spot. Wayward, like I said, was really solid on the top side. Tion, really, really clutch on the Poppy, a champion that I just don't understand why it's not higher priority. It does so well into so many of the meta champions. I mean, Rakan, Ahri, Sejuani, Renekton all rely on being able to dash in and out of fights. And Poppy just completely disallows that. Incredibly good draft here from Top Esports. And the Jace was influential as well. Was a lot more proactive, I would say, in the mid game than in the late game. The damage wasn't necessarily there, but Rookie was still really good on this pick. I think everybody on TES, especially in the back half of the game, really played well, but people are going to focus on the bot lane, and I think that's rightfully so. And then for Weibo on the other side of the map, you probably wanted to be able to win this, especially with the lead you were able to generate in the mid game, but everything really started crumbling down when you realized you just didn't have any ways to deal with the Kai'Sa and the Rell in the late game. Like I said, the bot lane for TES was really good, but draft-wise, there really isn't a lot of tools to be able to help out. You know, your carries in this game, you're relying a ton on Light to be able to deal a ridiculous amount of damage, and Top Esports just tried to get on the Xayah in every single fight, and so if Light's not going to be able to carry, who else is going to be able to step up? You really didn't have anybody else on this team that was able to do that. I think Weiwei actually played a relatively good game on the Sejuani. Crisp had some moments on the Rakan. Xiaohu wasn't miserable on the Ahri or anything, but I think the most noticeable gap in this game was, again, in the top lane. My dud of the game is going to go to the Shy in game number 3, but again, maybe this is a good thing for Weibo overall. Usually when I give the Shy dud of the game, and the game after, he ends up absolutely popping off. We already saw him do pretty well on the Rumble in game number 2. Not that it was entirely his success story that ended up winning them that game, but the Renekton in this game just wasn't impactful at all. This is the second time that this Renekton has just been completely useless. We've seen this champion dominate in the LPL and in the LCK for a little while. Even over in the Western regions, it's starting to become popular, and we've also seen it in, you know, the playoffs, and in this series in particular, just fall to some more passive picks that it can't really exploit in the early parts of the game. Renekton's a very interesting pick in the meta right now, but it's clearly not working for Weibo. This is not the first, and it won't be the last time that this pick ended up being a little bit of a problem for this Weibo team, but definitely worth pointing out. I do think that obviously the team fighting was lackluster from Weibo, but you can consider that a part of, you know, a comp problem rather than just an individual player problem. You've got a player like Xiaohu that I would consider one of the better team fighters in the world. Light is in a similar boat. Crisp, I think, is a great team fighter, and so it's not like you're lacking in talent in terms of that stage of the game, and it's very rare to see Weibo throw a lead quite as big as this one, but it did end up happening. TES just outplayed them towards the back half and created a big opportunity for themselves. They're now one game away from moving on, and Weibo is now one game away from officially having their 2023 season end, which would be a pretty big disappointment, I would say, for them. Maybe they're not expecting to go to Worlds, but still, I think they would like to be able to make it close, and this team certainly has the talent to make it close, but they're going to have to win both of the final 2 games now, which is certainly not going to be the easiest thing in the world. Is Top Esports going to be able to close the book on Weibo's 2023 season, or are they going to stay alive for at least one more game here in game number 4? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Weibo Gaming. They are able to take game number 4. They're going to tie this series up at 2 apiece, and we are going to a Silver Scrapes game number 5. I don't really have any statistics to back up the phrase that I'm about to say, but it really does feel like we've gotten more Game 5s in not only the LPL, but just in general this summer than any other year in League of Legends history. I can't really remember a year where so consistently every single series in every single round was at least close to going to a BO5. I think obviously Game 4s have been very, very common, but even Game 5s have been probably the most common outcome for a series. I'd have to do the math on that, but I don't even think it should be close. The fact that I'm bringing it up really makes me feel like it's not close, but it just continues to be a pattern. Teams are not able to blow each other out in the playoffs anymore, basically in any region. And I think that has absolutely continued here in the regional gauntlet. We saw 4 games before, and even though it was relatively kind of one-sided, this was not a one-sided series so far. Weibo doing everything in their power to keep up with Top Esports, who has looked good in the series, and this was a destruction. We talked about Game 2 being very in favor of Weibo with a pretty dominant win. This one was even worse, I think, for them. They were so strong. They were one dragon away from perfect gaming Top Esports here in Game 4, which is certainly not what you want to say, and so it's going to be a little bit of a more broad kind of overview of the game, because genuinely, like, everything has to go right for you to be able to win a professional League of Legends game game this hard, like everything has to be working for Weibo, and everything was working for Weibo. It wasn't one individual player, it wasn't one individual lane, it was just dominance across the board coming in from a good Weibo team to send us to this game number 5. Player of the game was actually relatively difficult because, again, everybody on the side of Weibo was playing super well. I think you could really bring up quite a few players. Weiwei, Light, I think was really good. Xiaohu, I think, got it on broadcast. But for me, player of the game in this one is going to go to Crisp. I'm really not a big fan of the Leona pick. We really haven't seen it be all that good when it's been used basically anywhere in the world across the playoffs so far. But Crisp is just so active and he's so good in terms of what he's able to accomplish that he does make this pick look completely overpowered. The amount of aggressiveness that he was able to play with in this game, even as, a lane that I would generally say is much weaker in the early game, I think was incredibly impressive. And again, he absolutely deserved to make an all-pro team. I know some people were upset by the fact that Crisp ended up making third team all-pro, but that's exactly where I put him, and I think he more than deserved it after the split that he had. He's arguably the best player on Weibo. I think that Xiaohu obviously is in that conversation. Light's a very good player, but I think Crisp is arguably the best player on Weibo Gaming, and he continues to be such a positive for this team overall. Really like what he's been able to do over the course of this year, and hopefully he's going to be able to keep it up because he deserves to make Worlds. I don't know about the rest of this team, but he deserves to make Worlds. Light was obviously really good, had a lot of plays ending up set up by the Leona, and really kind of got put in a good position, I would say, by the rest of his teammates, but you got to give him credit for being able to capitalize on it. I certainly do think that playing with Crisp definitely helps him, but you still have to be a really good AD carry to pilot this Kai'Sa at a super high level like they did in this game, and for them to dominate the 2v2, that takes 2 people. That doesn't just take 1, and so good stuff from both of them. Weiwei was awesome on the Ivern, completely controlled the jungle matchup. We'll get into that a bit more later on in this, but Weiwei was awesome. Xiaohu got player of the game in terms of the broadcast. I think his performance was a little bit overstated on broadcast, in my opinion, which is crazy coming from me. One of the biggest Xiaohu defenders, but again, he still was fantastic in this game, and he's been really good across the entire year, and the Shy was fine. Ended up playing Ornn and surviving, playing into the Poppy, who really wasn't as big of a problem, and Weibo in general just kind of won across the board. I really like this bot lane. Weiwei dominated the jungle matchup. Xiaohu was playing really well. Everything really worked for Weibo in this game, and they really did completely dominate, but Top Esports was on the other end of that. They got dominated in this game, and that's certainly not what you want to see for a team that was 1 game away from ending this series. A lot of that confidence has to be at least a little bit shaken at this point now. You can blame it on a lot of things. I don't think there was one individual player that ended up playing significantly worse than any of the other players, but I do think that my dud of the game is pretty clearly going to go to Tion in the jungle. It felt like he lost a lot of pressure early, and that really gave Weibo the ability to do basically anything that they wanted in the early game. A lot of that ending up in the bot lane with that Kai'Sa-Leona combo just starting to take over, but even the Tristana was out and about, moving around the map, really causing a lot of problems. It meant that the Jace pick, again, which can be relatively risky, was pretty useless because Jace from behind is just really not all that useful of a champion, and Jackie Love and Mark had to play significantly more safe than not only they want to in terms of the playstyles that they like, but they're playing Xayah Rakan into Kai'Sa-Leona. You don't want to play that early game safe because you're going to get outscaled, and so it really wasn't a good situation. I think Tion losing in the jungle ended up opening a lot of the possibilities for that to happen, and I don't think that was particularly good. Wayward wasn't particularly good. Basically everything went wrong for Top Esports. This is one of those games where you just kind of have to chalk it up and say, we've got to put it behind us, because I really don't think that there actually are a lot of takeaways for Top Esports to end up taking away from this. You can't get destroyed in the early game. I guess that's the takeaway, right? If you get destroyed in the early game, it becomes a lot more difficult to win, especially when you're playing, a quote-unquote early game comp, at least in comparison to what Weibo is offering on the other side of the map. And so, for Top, it's now do or die. It's do or die for both of these teams. Weibo's already had their back up against the wall. They basically had their back up against the wall all year long in terms of public perception and everything going on, but Top Esports is here as well. Will their spring underperformance end up coming back to bite them by not giving them that second chance, or are they going to be able to get it done, bounce back from this absolute destruction and be able to win game number 5? Well, we're going to find out right now who's going to be eliminated from 2023 and who's going to be moving on. The winner of game number 5 was Weibo Gaming, they are able to get the job done here in game number 5, and they're going to be the team that moves on to face off for the potential to go to the World Championships. That means that is the end of the line for Top Esports, and that is about as depressing of a sentence as you could have possibly expected. Top Esports was consensus a top 2, at worst, top 3 team in the LPL going into 2023 in January when we were all looking at these rosters, and it just has not worked out. They disappointed heavily in spring. It felt like they were finally starting to get back on track in summer, but it really does seem like some of the lingering problems of this team, the lingering inconsistencies of some of these players ended up costing them in the end. I think a lot of people have identified some problems with this team. I'm not necessarily sure I agree with all of those identities. Of course, I've disagreed with Top Esports haters all split long. I've been very vocal about that if you've watched the LPL recaps. I've gone into it so much that I honestly don't even want to do it again in this video. But before we talk about TES and what they did in 2023, it's time to talk about Weibo, who was able to take this Game 5 in relatively clean fashion. This was just a good win for them. Not the most dominant of Game 5s, especially compared to their other 2 wins in this series, which were both, I believe, 24-minute wins. This still was a very good game, though. They controlled it the entire way. Top Esports never really had enough pressure to really be able to push back at all, and I think that's definitely a positive in favor of Weibo. But again, this team is incredibly talented. The only reason that they were knocked out of playoffs in the first place was because they played against LNG. They took them to 5 games, and that was a team that then would take JD Gaming to 5 games twice. And so, who knows how good this Weibo Gaming team is. It's good to see them step up here, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to The Shy in the top lane. We talked about this. There's one game in every single best of 5 where The Shy ends up stepping up and really looking good. He really wasn't all that impactful in the first 4. Was pretty good in game 2 on that Rumble. I'm certainly not trying to take that away from him, but certainly wasn't the focal point of that game. This game, he felt like the focal point on Gwen. It really did feel like the game started to rotate around him, if you will, and I thought he was really, really good on Gwen. It's really good to see him be able to get an aggressive pick in a good matchup against the Cassante and actually be able to take advantage of it. The Shy can still have good performances. It's just not going to happen every single game. We'll talk about Wayward in a second. He's getting a lot of hate for this series. I do not agree with that at all. I think he was by far the best player on Top Esports in this series, but we'll talk about that in a bit. My player of the series, though, as a whole, is not quite going to go to the Shy. It is going to go to Crisp, the support here. I really loved how Crisp was able to play out this whole series. He almost got my player of the game here for game number 5. He was my player of the game in game 4. It really did feel like the bot lane was the focal point for Weibo in terms of where they wanted to put a lot of their pressure, and I think a lot of that was because Crisp really was stepping up and creating a lot on the map. Credit to Weiwei, I thought he also had a really good series. He definitely played better than Tian, but those two as a duo were definitely a power point on the map for Weibo, and they tried to create that as much as possible. Weiwei and Crisp playing together, I think they had one of their more complete series as a duo, and I think that was really, really big time for them. Xiaohu was really good, maybe a little bit overstated in this series. I actually think you could argue he was the least important member of Weibo, but only because I think the Shy had this good game number 5. Outside of that, obviously, it is the Shy up in the top lane, but Light was really solid, Crisp was really good, Weiwei was very good. They were the 3 core members of this Weibo team to me in this series, and that's going to be the big reason they're moving on. Congratulations to this team. They are now 1 series away from the World Championships. But for Top Esports, their 2023 run will end here today. Like I said, very much below expectations, but I don't think it was in the way that people expected. You can talk about how Wayward and Mark aren't exactly the big pieces for this team, but I just don't understand how you can watch this series and say that those 2 were the ones that ended up being the problem. And yes, I've been a big defender of Tian over the course of this year, and he, quite frankly, was the biggest problem in this series, and I'm not going to disagree with that. He's going to get my dud of the game here for game number 5, but also this Top Esports team has convinced themselves somehow, some way that Skarner is super OP. They end up bowing out of playoffs against, or at least upper bracket, I believe, against Billy Gaming by trying to pull out that Skarner in a do-or-die game. They do the same thing here in the regionals, and in both games, it absolutely does not work out. I don't really understand. They're not the only team that's doing this. Skarner has been rising in popularity, and we've seen it work a grand total of once, I think, over the past, 2 weeks. I don't understand why this champion continues to get so many looks from so many different teams, but Tian was not able to pilot it well. Fell behind early, and Skarner became entirely useless. I get that it's point-and-click lockdown for potentially the Gwen, or the Trist, or the Zeri, or somebody, right? The Rakan, whatever you want to do, right? But there's just not a lot of opportunity for you to be able to set that up if you're not able to survive the early game, and Skarner's early game sucks right now, and so I don't know, man. Don't like this pick. Tion played poorly in this series. And again, like, there's this narrative that Tion's, a choker in big moments. Obviously, that's not true. He's a world champion and he was finals MVP. We know that he can play in big moments. But I think confidence is really something that he does struggle with. And consistency is absolutely something, I should say, that he does struggle with. And so, Tion kind of poor in this series. I thought Jackie Love was kind of poor in this series, quite frankly. He had a really good game number 3. I think that's kind of the exception. But outside of that, he was really bad here in game number 5. And he was really lacking damage in a lot of their losses. When you look at game 2, when you look at game 4, he was not doing all that much. He really wasn't a big factor for the team, and he was the MVP for me in the regular season. To see Tion and Jackie Love, the two best performers by far from this team in the regular season, struggle so much in a do-or-die situation here for this team, it's disappointing. I liked how Wayward played. Mark was relatively fine. Rookie was inconsequential, but in a way that I don't really blame him for. Just in general, Top Esports kind of underperformed. The players that you needed to see do well, the carries of this team over the course of this year, just couldn't get it done, and their season is going to end because of it. I'm not exactly sure the direction that this org ends up going in, but missing Worlds is definitely not something that I think they expected to do in 2023. I think that they definitely thought they were going to be able to get out of this regional gauntlet. They were going in with the best performance in summer, and they just couldn't get it done. Definitely going to be interesting to see where they go, but their 2023 is over. And then for Weibo, like I said, excited for them. Going to be interesting to see how they do and if they are able to get to the World Championships, but even giving yourself an opportunity, being one series away, is better than I expected from this team, and I'm really interested to talk about the matchup next. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Regional Qualifier Round 1 overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Of course, up on the screen now is going to be the bracket. LNG, having beaten Edward Gaming, is going to have qualified for that number 3 seed, but EDG is not eliminated yet. They now face Weibo Gaming, who did beat Top Esports for that 4th and final seed. We will cover that in the upcoming week, but I'm incredibly excited to see it. I think this series is incredibly interesting. Honestly, if I had to pick a winner in terms of current form, I'm going to lean towards Weibo. I actually think they're playing better at the current moment, and I've really liked this team's roster over the course of this year. It's just been the inconsistency. I think the bot side of the map is so much better than what EDG is offering. I think I would take Xiaohu over Fofo pretty clearly, and I would take Light and Crisp pretty clearly over the current form of Uzi and Mako, and I think that's really going to make a difference. But of course, Ole versus the Shy, that could be a matchup that really swings things back in favor of Edward Gaming. Definitely going to be intriguing to see, but I would love to know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Who do you think is going to be taking it between those two teams? Who's going to be the final rep from the LPL at Worlds? I'm really curious to know your thoughts and opinions. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LPL on this channel. We post about all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL and playoffs are really in swing for all of them, and Worlds is right around the corner. You want to hit that sub button. You want to hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live, so you can learn about all those teams that are going to be performing at the upcoming World Championships. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.